So in Ajahn Chah's emphasis on sati sampajanya was something I really appreciated, because he could bring the actual monastic form, the structure of Vinaya and the form into consciousness to be used, not to just institutionalize us and make us into kind of conventional monks, just like changing costumes, but to actually use conventions for observing, witnessing, reflecting on the experiences that an individual has, living within a monastery, within a disciplined structure, a committed way of surrendering to a moral convention, a system of etiquette and a tradition, and learning to use that experience not for attachment, but for helping. I could see it to help myself to see more clearly, to trust in this awareness and observe within the boundaries and structures of monastic form. And so this was, I think, Luang Por Chah's genius. It made sense out of both the Dhamma, Vinaya, and he offered excellent opportunities to develop and cultivate monastic life. So it was through his wisdom and his compassion that I'm still a monk, really, because he was. I began to appreciate, the whole package of this tradition, in the Theravada's tradition, as I learned it through living and training with Luang Por Chah in his monastery in Thailand. Wisdom is, when we use this word, one was expecting, when I was naive and a new university student, I was expecting to find wisdom in a university, and taking courses in philosophy, and we learned all kinds of wise sayings and studied the wisdom of others. And so, we could maybe be very clever with our ways of thinking and manipulating our thoughts and intellect to come up with new ideas, new ways of analysis, or just maneuvering through the conditioned realm of thought. But the thinking process itself is an obstruction if grasped as an end in itself. And this the Buddha pointed to in his teaching of letting go of conditioned phenomena. Because, the thinking process is conditioned. Our ability to think, in the language we have, my original language is English, of course, so it's what I think in is this language. And then the thinking process depends on memory, and then it's also influenced by the culture, by the attitude, like the American English and attitudes of Americans can be quite different from the English. So even the language, there is a statement about the thing that separates the British from the Americans is their common language. But language itself is not to be, when we just grasp concepts, no matter how sublime those concepts might be, or even in terms of worldly values wise, the ignorance is still there, the unawakened state of just operating from the conditioned plane without any reference, without any discernment, but just through conditioning. Language also, and the thinking process, is very dualistic. You know, it has, if you have good, you have to have bad and right, then there's wrong, true, and then false, heaven and hell. And so on the level of trying to figure out things like Buddha used words that have no, you know, that you can't imagine what they are, like the concept nibbana. You know, this word is, what is it, you know, and you're trying to imagine. And nowadays the word nibbana means the best, usually. You see, you know, in all, or like I've been in Australia, New Zealand, things like the Nirvana Beauty Salon or something like this. So, and so it usually is associated with bliss, happiness, or the very best, or a kind of heavenly state. But what the Buddha, you see, with the emphasis the Buddha made was not on this dualistic structure of nibbana as opposed, you know, to have some opposite, but to realize nibbana is mean letting go of thoughts, of language, of our conditioned way of thinking through the cultural conditioning, to realize the ultimate reality, the deathless, the anatta Dhamma, the real. And that we can't, you know, when you're trying to describe that or define it or analyze it, you just get your, you know, brain in a twist. It just is impossible because it's beyond imagination. The Buddha used words like anatta and nibbana and shunyata. He used words like the unborn, uncreated, unformed, unconditioned. He used like the anatta Dhamma, deathless truth, deathless reality. And these words, they are, you know, words, translation of Pali words into English words. But notice that the conditioned and the unconditioned, just taking these two words, the unconditioned is just a negation of conditions. But it has tried to imagine, tried to create an image of the unconditioned in your mind. And you can't do it. Your thinking process packs up. But it can create any condition, you know, whether it's a fantasy or just a memory of, you know, something like a chair or a table. But the conditioned realm has form, has color, has taste. It can, and then we can create conditions. We can create fantasies in our mind and manipulate conditions with ideas, images, true, false, right, wrong images, beautiful, ugly, whatever. But the unconditioned, unborn, we can't. And so the Buddha in his teaching was bringing us to the point where we see the futility and the suffering we create by our obsessive, blind attachment to conditions. And of course modern society now is very much attached to the thinking process, to reason, logic, you know, to try to analyze, criticize, to compare, you know, beliefs in progress and how attachment to ideals, strong views, strong opinions about politics, economics, religion, philosophy, whatever. So these attachments, even if we're attaching to something very good, it still has its opposite, and it still binds us to the confusion that we create through this blind attachment. So the aim, it's been, in my lifetime, I became interested in Buddhism in 1955, when I was in the American Navy in Japan, came across Zen Buddhism. And so that was 1955 up to the present. I've seen, in 1955 there were hardly anybody had any interest, in terms of people I knew, other Americans, who had any interest whatsoever in Buddhism. It was not, something that was a part of our cultural expectation. It came to, a kind of fashionable, faddish interest in the 1950s, through the American occupation of Japan, cultural exchanges that were taking place. And from that, of course, it was the beginning, over 50 years, the kind of amount of interest that countries like the United States or the United Kingdom and European countries and Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, all these places, and even, in countries that you wouldn't expect any interest at all in Buddhism. There we get emails and seeking information or invitations to give retreats. And why is it that at this time there's this sudden interest and upsurge of interest in Buddha Dhamma? Because in terms of, say, Western attitudes about progress and evolution, Buddhism is a very old tradition. It's like, it's older than most other religions. And so it's, 2,552 years for us is a long, long time. And it can also be seen as something appropriate to ancient India. And what is it, why is it that, was there any interest in modern Malaya or in modern Britain, for example? And it's because it's a wisdom teaching that has survived through the various rising, falling civilizations that it's inevitably encountered in its past history and survived up to the present time. And it is not about ancient Indian religion or culture. The whole emphasis the Buddha made was on the common human experience that we can all relate to, is suffering. And so in this unique way of teaching, he brought attention to suffering, or in Pali, dukkha. It means that this sense of dissatisfaction or a lack, or when even life at its best, there's still this dukkha, this suffering that we experience as human individuals, whether, whatever, if we're wealthy or poor, male or female, European, Asian, or whatever, it's the suffering is very much the same thing. And this using suffering or dukkha as a noble truth is a very, unique approach to religious and spiritual practice. And because it's not ultimate truth, it's not like the ultimate reality. It would be a very depressing kind of religion if we all just assumed everything's suffering and unsatisfactory in a kind of resigned way to misery. But it's putting suffering into consciousness so that we begin to observe it and be able to discern that which is aware of suffering isn't suffering. So it's a very direct way of pointing to reality always in the present, the timeless reality of now. And this of course is now a teaching sought after in the Western world in a way that it was never even considered, or way most Western people, Europeans, Americans, could never really understand or appreciate such an approach until fairly recently. It was too bizarre, too different from our own to even be able to understand it, even on the intellectual level. Very few could really appreciate it until fairly recently. Now, over the past 50 years, there are so many Western people have practiced Buddhist meditation, taken on in various Buddhist traditions, that there are now quite teachers, of European teachers who have insight and have knowledge that from the practice of Buddhism, where, say, 50 years ago there wasn't anyone that I encountered. And then when I went to Thailand in 1966, went there in order to find a teacher, because I certainly couldn't find any where I was living in the United States. So it wasn't through lack of trying. Didn't seem to be any there, or if they were, I didn't know where they were. So the aim of going to Asia was to search for a teacher that would teach me how to practice meditation. So that is why I, went to Thailand and became a Buddhist monk, and why I still am one, because obviously it was an effective teaching. And then the life of a Buddhist monk I quite enjoy. And it's not it's a very good way to live one's life as a human individual. And it's something totally out of my expectation from my social, cultural background. I never thought my parents would have never have expected their son to be a Buddhist monk. But that's what's happened, and of course the result of this is a sense of gratitude to the Buddha, the traditional, the historical Buddha, and all the monastic Sangha that has supported this teaching through the centuries up to the present time, where I could encounter it and practice it. And of course that is exemplified in the figure of Luang Por Chah as the teacher that I encountered, that I found that I felt a great affinity with, and could really trust and consider his way of living, his own behavior, and the way he taught us. So this is a time now that is very heartwarming to see here in Malaya, the amount of interest now, because when I first came to Malaysia in 1964, there wasn't anything like this happening. And so I feel very inspired by this brief visit to Malaya this time, here in Kuala Lumpur and in Penang for 2 nights, and to see the growing interest in this wisdom teaching, because it is something that is that I've found that I can wholeheartedly recommend. That it is an effective tool to use for freeing oneself from ignorance and the suffering that we create in our minds. So I wish to express my gratitude and appreciation for all those involved to Sian and all the people who joined in making this day possible, because it is the day in Thailand that is the Memorial Remembrance Day in Ubon at the monastery, Lumpur Chow's monastery, and the Sangha tends to collect there on the 16th of January every year, and I usually try to attend the meeting there every year, going from England to Thailand intentionally to attend this Memorial Day, Remembrance Day. And in Wat Pah Pong, it's usually a week before the 16th of January. It starts with a kind of retreat, meditations, and as the people assemble and Lumpur Chah's disciples gather. And it's something that always, something I feel is worthy to do, because to have this sense of gratitude for a teacher is a very, it brings joy into one's own mind. And the monastic life itself leads to, if lived properly, leads towards gratitude and contentment. And nowadays, contentment is a virtue that hardly anyone recognizes, because the society is determined to keep us totally discontented. And so the economy will develop. If you're all contented, the economy as we know it would collapse. So we have to be discontented and always want something, the newest thing, the newest model, the latest design. And so modern materialism, free market capitalism and so forth is designed to make us want things and be discontented. And the monastic life, as the Buddha established it in this traditional form, is leading towards contentment with very few things. And so contentment is also a very peaceful mental experience. To be content is a tranquil experience. Contentment, gratitude, these are the foundations of the holy life, of spiritual development. Just trying to through your own willpower, attain Nibbana, it's impossible. No matter how clever you might be, it's through letting go and through these simple reflections to bring contentment and gratitude and peacefulness. And the true nature of our consciousness is that, in which we begin to not struggle anymore in the kind of mindless way that one used to struggle, because that's all one had done in one's life, was to keep struggling to compete and develop and get something you don't have yet, or get rid of the things that you have you don't like. So now I will end this reflection and my gratitude, appreciation for all the care and attention and hard work that went into making this event possible. We have Ajahn Dhamma come from Thailand, and Ajahn Chandiko came all the way from New Zealand, Ajahn Chah Remembrance from Germany, and all assembled here, and other monks from many other places here in Kuala Lumpur on the 16th of January 2010. So I wish to give you all my best wishes and blessings, and encourage your interest and practice of the Dhamma, the teaching of the Buddha.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.